Good morning, Canada and the United States. We're proud to be here on behalf of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. We have a very exciting public policy panel that deals with a topic that is really front and center on both Canadian population's minds and the U.S., and certainly a hot topic amongst parliamentarians and congressional leaders is the opening of the Canada-U.S. border. The border has been closed for over 15 months now, and discussions have really heated up as to when and how the border should open up. We have a all-star panel for you here this morning of really leading thinkers from different areas that I'm going to bring forward. Our first speaker this morning is going to be Congressman Brian Higgins, who's a congressman, Democratic congressman from New York State, who's really holds some really interesting positions. He's involved in the Canada-U.S. Inter-Parliamentary Caucus, which is a joint group between Canada and U.S. that looks at issues on both sides of the borders, and he's also chair of the Northern Border Caucus, and has been a real champion of getting the issue of opening the border on both the media's plate and also on the public policy agenda. Next, we'll have a Canadian parliamentarian, so it's a really interesting mix that we have for you this morning. The Honourable Wayne Easter, who currently chairs the Finance Committee and has been a leading voice in Canada for driving the discussion on how and when the border should open, and we're really lucky to have both these gentlemen with us this morning. Also with us is Beth Potter, who's the CEO of the Tourism Industry Association of Canada. Beth has been one of the most proactive voices in terms of making sure that we open the border and open travel in a safe, coherent way. She did a lot of media this week in terms of talking to Canadians, whether it was on talk radio or national television broadcasts. She's really engaged her constituency of tourism very directly. And I think one of the other interesting voices that we have to bring to the table is good friend Althea Raj, who's a member of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. She's a regular at-issue panelist with CBC and has, on a weekly basis, the opportunity to really dissect the policy issues of the day. So bringing her voice into this as a kind of a third-party journalist to look at how this whole issue unfolds on both sides of the border, I think is going to be very interesting. Our format this morning is going to be relatively freewheeling, which I think is going to be fun. And we'll be going first to Congressman Higgins, then over to Mr. Easter, then to Beth Potter, and we'll go to Althea Raj from there, and then we'll hit them with a series of questions taking us to about 9:45. So thank you for being with us, and with that in mind, I'll turn it over to you, Congressman Higgins. Thank you for being with us. It's a real privilege to have you.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I just would first say that unnecessarily, the United States-Canadian relationship took a major hit over the past 14 months, and unnecessarily so. Because of politics, because of a situation relative to the coronavirus. Last year at this time, the United States was the world leader in COVID deaths. Today, we're the world leader in vaccinations. The Canadian government did a much better job early on in the corona response. Efforts to open the border go back to the first month that it was closed. And it was understandable that the U.S.-Canadian border was closed because the United States had 5, 7, 10, and 15 times more deaths in COVID-19 cases than they did in Canada. Americans were not welcomed in Canada because we were viewed as, understandably, super spreaders. United States American citizens were not allowed in 27 European Union countries for the same reason. So we have come a long way, and throughout all of this, the common message, we were all admonished on the Canadian side of the border and the U.S. side of the border: follow the science, follow the facts, follow the data. And the science and the facts and the data all point to the same thing. We now have a very powerful medicine against this disease. And if you are fully vaccinated, whether it's 7% of your population or 45% of your population, you pose a very small risk of getting COVID or giving COVID. And therefore, those individuals who have been fully vaccinated on both sides of the border should be able to cross that border. You make exceptions for essential travelers. The National Hockey League gets an exception. Why is it that the essential traveler category is not expanded to include people who love each other but have been separated for 15 months? Why isn't that exception inclusive of people who own property in Canada and who simply want to get in their car in Buffalo, drive over the Peace Bridge, and go and visit, maintain, and enjoy their private property in Bay Beach, Ontario, or Crystal Beach, Ontario? Look, the United States and Canada has a special relationship. Your economy is about a $2 trillion economy. It's a mixed economy. You value the same things we do. You uphold the same principles that we think are important. We have so much commonality. So, my hope is that wisdom and science and facts and data will prevail. And I had it confirmed from the White House last night that U.S. President Biden and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are going to meet either later today or tomorrow on this issue. And in the end, these are the only two decision makers that matter. They can make a game-changing decision. This could be an inflection point. And look, nobody has ever argued that the border be opened arbitrarily. It has to be opened to be successful. It has to be done safely. And what we know from these vaccines is that is very powerful medicine against the disease, posing, again, a very small risk of giving COVID or giving COVID. And this nonsense about having to quarantine in a hotel, and it confuses people. The fact of the matter is the messenger RNA is the stuff that converts DNA by telling a cell to make proteins. Why are proteins important? Because that is the medicine. That is the active ingredient in vaccines. I have pushed my government to share vaccines with our friends in Canada because Canadians are, in fact, our friends. I've pushed my government to allow Canadians to travel over the border, over the Peace Bridge, to use surplus vaccines that otherwise are discarded as medical waste. I mean, this is not ideological. This is commonsensical. And I think that all of us need to get back to a semblance of normalcy. And the President of the United States, 5 weeks ago, went before the American people on national television and took off his face mask. And he said, you no longer have to wear a face mask if you're fully vaccinated, just underscoring the power, the efficacy of the vaccines that are currently available. Just by contrast, the vaccines that have been approved in the United States for use have been rigorously tested for both safety and efficacy. And they are between 90 and 95% effective. The seasonal flu vaccine that's available over here in the United States is 45% effective. So I don't know if enough attention has been placed on the miraculous success of, first, developing a vaccine as quickly as they've been developed, and secondly, as safe and as powerful as they are. That should count for something. That should be the basis for an opening of the U.S.-Canadian border.
Thank you for those remarks, Congressman Higgins. And also let me thank you publicly. I think the sharing of vaccines from the Biden administration and your role and others in promoting that idea, sharing that with Canada when we needed it most is just really reflective of how important the relationship is between our two countries. And so thank you for your leadership on that. Mr. Easter, you've been an outspoken voice on this. And I think you're bringing the Canadian perspective. You're certainly an expert on the Canada-U.S. relations with your role in the Canada-U.S. Inter-Parliamentary panel, co-chairing that from the Canadian side. We'd love to bring you into the conversation.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for putting on the webinar. And I certainly want to thank Beth Potter and TIAC for their forcefulness on being out there and representing the tourism and hospitality industry, and what normalizing relationships really means, and especially across the U.S. border, really means for the economy and for the hospitality and tourist businesses to number one, survive, and number two, start to get back to normal and have some security in their future. Look, the Canada-U.S. border is the longest undefended border in the world. Our economies are intertwined. Our supply chains are intertwined. Roughly, it was up as high as $2 billion worth of trade a day. Essential workers work both sides of the border, and especially like in the Windsor area, I think it's something like 2,000 healthcare workers go across that border a day to work in the other countries' facilities. Our families are related across the border. And so on this particular issue, Representative Higgins and myself and the organizations we represented, we have been working for some time to pressure both our administrations to find a path to get the border functioning normally again. I believe it was Brian, early March or somewhere around there, we put out a joint press release, and I said to Congressman Higgins at the time that we have managed on the Canadian side to create a heck of a lot of fear. It was useful in the beginning in terms of getting people to stay home, wear masks, social distance, etc. But we really did make people fearful. And when we put out that release, I think I said to Brian that, look, my phone will light up in my office because I'm going to catch hell from people who are saying, you can't open that border. We're fearful of what letting Americans in here. But you do have to you have to provoke the debate. And I think that's moved forward a lot since then. And we weren't, as Brian has already said, we weren't just saying open the border today. We're saying the governments, both sides, need to offer some hope that the border is going to open, but lay out a plan. Here's the conditions, A, B, C, D, on what needs to be met for the borders to open in a regular fashion. Is it 70% vaccination? Is it 75%? What it may be, that's immaterial at the moment, but lay it out so people understand and they know under what conditions we can basically normalize our relationship again. And if things change, as they have many times during this pandemic, then you can adjust your plan. And I think it shows yesterday with the Prime Minister's announcement that we are indeed making progress. I still think we have a substantial distance to go. But to those who may be a little fearful, in my riding here, and people have residents, seasonal residents, both sides of the border, Canadians in the United States, Americans here. I have a lot in my riding because I happen to be in the Cavendish is in my riding, Green Gables, and a lot of Americans will come here from right across the U.S. For 4 to 5 months a year. Seasonal residents have been for years. Those people I know are doubly vaccinated. They're willing to come here, follow the quarantine rules if that's what they have to follow. They weren't here last year. They pay 1.5 times taxation. They can come in a safe fashion. They can add to our economy. They're going to renovate their seasonal residence. And they will do it in a safe fashion. So I do think that we have to get there. Just on yesterday's announcement, I might mention that, and this is what the Prime Minister said. The first step, Canada is introducing a phased approach jointly with the U.S. But the first step includes allowing travelers who are currently permitted to enter Canada and have been fully vaccinated, and they lay out the rules. Look, in my view, we have to go further than who is currently permitted. Those seasonal residents I talked about, they'll add to our economy. They take pride in their residence. They will do their visit here in a safe fashion. They have community friends. We need to allow them in, and we need to get to a normalization as fast as possible. But at least it's a step forward yesterday. We're moving in the right direction. I agree with Congressman Higgins that I hope the President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau's discussion goes well, and that they allow some common sense to enter this picture, so we can get back to a fairly normal relationship, but in a safe way.
Thank you, Mr. Easter. Excellent opening comments. I wanted to thank you for a couple of things. Your leadership, along with Congressman Higgins, in driving this issue and driving the debate on it so that we're at this point, I think has been pivotal. But I also, on a higher level, want to thank your government for the incredible work on vaccination. I mean, yesterday, Minister Anand shared the stat during the press conference that 70% of eligible Canadians are vaccinated. That's an incredible accomplishment. You think of where we were last year without even a vaccination. And I think that's part of the story here. We have to be able to accept the success of vaccination and the things that provides for us on both sides of the border. Beth, you've probably talked to more journalists in the last week on this issue than anybody in Canada, also talking with your members, talking with Canadians. Let's bring you into the conversation. Your industry is one of the most important sectors in the Canadian economy, the hardest hit sector in terms of being the first hit. Share your perspective with us, if you would.
Thanks, Hugh. I would like to kind of come at this from the tourism business owner's perspective. This is an industry that, as you said, has been hardest hit. Many of these businesses, a good number of them, have been shuttered for 15 months. They have had to lay off and displace, over 500,000 employees from our sector, and they've whittled away at their savings. They've taken on more debt in order to stay viable as businesses, for when we do restart the industry again. So this is they're waiting. They've already lost one summer. They don't want to lose a second summer. They certainly don't want to lose the fall. And we want to give travelers, both leisure and business, the opportunity to start planning. We want the business owners to have the opportunity to start planning as well. If you've shuttered your business for 15 months, there are some operational things that you're going to have to do to ramp up and get ready. You're going to need to rehire staff, and hopefully that those staff are still waiting to come back, because we know a lot of them have moved on to other sectors in order to continue to pay the bills. So we've got a big recruiting strategy ahead of us. We've got to ramp up businesses. We've got to communicate with our guests. And so we're asking for a plan that allows for this, with a timeline that will allow for us to understand what does it look like, so that we can start to do these things and be ready. Tourism is not something that you flip on with a switch. As I said, it's an advanced booking industry, and we need to continue to remind ourselves of that. I was talking to an operator just this morning. He operates a fly-in fishing camp, and he's got, his market is 100% American, and his guests are continually emailing him and calling him and saying, "What's it look like? Can we come in? Hey, I had my flights booked and now they've been canceled." And they're getting frustrated because there is this sense of unending, we don't know, and it's coming soon. And I guess what we were trying to get to with this conversation is that the never-ending maybe is too much, and we need a plan, and we need a plan now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Beth. Really important themes. I've heard from countless tourism operators. I heard from a store owner in the Windsor area who relies on tourism. who's been shut the entire time because of their unique position on the border. And I think there was a sense from all of the tourism businesses early on with the closure of the border that they supported whatever we had to do last year to stay safe. But there's a sense now that we need to move forward to get us back on track. So interesting reflections. We'll come back to you. Our next guest is Althea Raj. As I said, Althea has that unique perspective of looking at things from a journalist. We didn't want to just have the pro-border the coalition folks speaking this morning. But Althea, maybe you could just unpack for us how you see this dynamic playing with your media colleagues, but also with the public and some of the dynamics that you see around this issue.
Yeah, and I would say perhaps with the government as well, because while Wayne sits in the Liberal caucus, I think on this issue he is slightly offside with where the health minister may be and some of her cabinet colleagues. I think I'd just like to say, I think it's possible to agree that the science suggests you should reopen, but understand why the government is being extremely cautious and doesn't want, even though it claims to be a pro-science government, doesn't want to fully embrace that science. I think it's also possible to believe that while, as Congressman Higgins talked about, the relationship has taken a hit over the last 15 months, and to believe that the longer the border is closed to non-essential travel, the more it thickens, to believe that once it reopens, that the damage will not have been lasting. I think it's important to remember that the lesson of the pandemic for Canadian politicians have been that those who have been cautious, who have taken more restrictive approaches, have been rewarded. In popular opinion surveys, we see that the Premier is in Atlantic Canada, for example, in Quebec, John Horgan in BC. The other fear, I think, is the fourth wave. We've heard already from health officers in the Peel region around Toronto and the Waterloo region about the Delta variant, about the fear that a fourth wave is coming. The other thing, of course, we can't forget is politics. The Liberal government has an eye on going to the polls in late August, September, and a fourth wave, of course, would destroy that opportunity, much like the third wave destroyed any talk of having a late spring election. So and I'll be really quick here, while I completely understand where the tourism industry is coming and where small operators and large operators are coming from, I think a bigger fear for the government is to send everybody back into lockdown. Already people are COVID fatigued completely. They want to make sure the school year returns back to normal in September. And that is why, in large part, they're taking an extremely cautious approach. And I'll just end by saying that some of the indications this week from the Liberal government, I agree with Wayne, the announcement earlier this week was not as far as most people had hoped. Some of the benchmarks have been laid. We heard that from the public safety minister in speaking to local mayors in the Niagara region, that they would be seemingly willing to open things more if 75% of the country had a first dose, 20% had a second dose, that those yardsticks seem to be moving. The other thing that I think is important to flag is that the Prime Minister suggested that even if President Biden wants to open the border, the rules on the Canadian side may not be similar. They may not be in line with what the US is doing. And frankly, since March 2020, they haven't been in line with what the US is doing. Coming back to Canada is a lot more difficult than going to the United States with quarantine rules and testing rules. And I think we can expect that there will not necessarily be a one-size-fits-all solution.
Great, Althea. Thank you. Great perspective. There's so much to cover here. I'll just jump right to it. I was talking to a public policy expert, earlier on in the spring, who suggested that governments, regardless of which government they are in a crisis, is too slow to respond on issues like protecting the population. When a crisis starts, and they're too slow to take the restrictions away when a crisis abates. I mean, is that level of cautiousness just endemic in the officials that are involved in this from the public health agency? Wayne, maybe I'll throw that to you. Are we just seeing too much caution for our own good on this issue?
No, I do think Thea hit it right on. The part of the reason for the substantial cautiousness here is those that were more cautious in the beginning are being rewarded. Those who weren't aren't. And so I think it's part of that mentality. Bureaucratic systems work, as you know, really, really slow as well. That's another part of the problem, except as we rolled out programming during the pandemic, they were rolled out quick. There was the willingness to adapt and change as it went along. So it shows that governments and government bureaucracies can move fast, take some risks, but they're on this one, on the health side, I think we've been very, very cautious, and it's due to those factors.
Hugh, can I add something on that?
Please.
I think, I hear Congressman Higgins talk about the mayors that he and that Wayne and that Nate Erskine-Smith, the Toronto Liberal MP, have been talking to. The one big opposition that the Prime Minister has faced has come from actually the premiers. It's hard for the federal government to take a stance when the Ontario Premier, the Premier responsible for the most populous province in this country, is running attack ads against him on the NHL broadcast, saying that he's been lax on the border. And so I think unless there is a call from the premiers to relax the border, Justin Trudeau has basically very little incentive to act seemingly unilaterally without the premier's input and backing to reopen that border.
Yeah, the U.S. dynamic, the U.S.-Canada border dynamic has definitely been complicated by that provincial interaction. And maybe I would just start Congressman Higgins by saying the land border policy hasn't been consistent with the air policy right from the beginning. And I had a local border business suggest to me that there's almost a social inequality with respect to that. Somebody can't drive over the border with their family in a contained vehicle, but you can fly to St. Bart's or St. Kitts or St. Elsewhere, or St. Petersburg in Florida. So is that an issue we should be concerned about?
Well, certainly. There's no scientific basis for exceptions, and when you have certain people that can travel and others can't, it creates frustration, inequality of public policy application. When people don't know what to do, they typically do nothing. And what I would argue is that this is not a situation where you can do nothing. Behavioral economics, behavioral science will say that people don't make decisions about things. They make decisions about descriptions of things. And that's why I think it's so vitally important to develop a clear, concise, consistent message about a powerful medicine that we have now and have not had for most of this pandemic. And people just, politics obviously plays a big role in this. The premier Buffalo, everything north of Buffalo is Fort Erie up to Toronto and the greater Toronto area. The province of Ontario is the fastest growing, largest province in all of Canada. Nearly 40% of the entire population of the 38 million people that live in Canada live in the province of Ontario. And I have heard the premier, I don't know him. I'm not in a position to pass judgment on him. I'm just taking what he has said publicly. And that is he wants tighter restrictions on the border. The border's closed. How much tighter can you restrict the border that's already closed? So the point is, I just think that people are saying kind of silly things just to be able to say something. And the only ones that can do anything about that are the respective elected leaders, the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada, who I believe are men of goodwill, in recognition of the fact that the U.S.-Canadian relationship took a hit over the past 15 months. First world leader that President Biden reached out to was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I think that was in recognition that this was an unfortunate set of circumstances, but we need to correct this. We need to restart this relationship. So I just, again, I think with words, we have a tendency to almost say too much. But these vaccines, they are deemed to be highly effective. All viruses mutate, and they mutate many, many, many times. And when I look at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in their guidance, these vaccines are deemed to be so powerful that they protect you even against the variants and even against this new Delta variant that a lot of folks are talking about here. COVID, COVID it's CoV-2, meaning that there was a CoV-1. And so the coronavirus has been with us for 20 years. It was then SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. There are 7.9 billion people on the planet. We're getting these diseases because we're interacting with animals, because we have to find more places for people to live. And in doing so, we're destroying ecosystems, which is, getting bats that either directly pass this on to humans or through an intermediary. That's a problem. So my point is, the coronavirus is not going to be eradicated. So what you have to try to do is manage the larger crisis. You have problems in Canada owing to your policies on drug pricing and on patents and the short duration of those patents. Because of that, which makes sense outside of a pandemic, these were, I think, decades-long policies. The pharmaceutical industry has been driven out of Canada. You're not making one dose of vaccine. So, a lot of this has to do, again, with the sharing of what we have plenty of with our neighbors toward the goal of an announcement that just doesn't say simply that we're going to continue to keep the border closed. That's unfair and to the people of Canada and to the people of the United States. After 15 months of misery, they are entitled to a more thoughtful approach as it relates to not just a plan, but a plan of action that has metrics, that has dates. And look, plans sometimes don't work out. Reasonable people understand that. So if you don't meet those metrics and you say, well, we wanted to open up on July 4th or Canada Day, July 1st, but a number of problems have come up. You just can't go silent. And because you're messing with people, you're messing with their life quality, you're messing with their personal economics, and you're messing with their mental health. And that's a big issue here in the United States, but also in Canada as well.
Passionate commentary, Congressman. Let me stay with you just for one quick second to talk about the changing dynamic of political leadership in the U.S. on this. I mean, President Biden called for a plan on this, very early coming into office. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer weighed in on opening the border. How much has the leadership of President Biden, Senator Schumer, other congressional leaders starting to come to play to add pressure to do something? Are we making progress in the States on this issue?
Yeah, I think so. This is like the media. This is all about reaching frequency. Every time there is an inflection point, every time there's a pressure point that I can find, I try to use just to keep, that issue front and center. So I think it's very important that everybody weigh in, and the border's going to open at some point. And I think just calling this out for what it is very, very important to people as a narrative as to where we've been and where we want to be and what has to occur in order for us to be where we all want to be. So Senator Schumer's voice is a welcome voice. I think President Biden has taken a much more adult approach to this thing. And you have two obligations to your constituents. One is to be honest about the severity of the situation, which I think all of us have over the past 15 months, but to also keep trying. And we have now, and I know I keep saying it, but we have now a very powerful medicine against COVID. And that has to be recognized, because that's what we were told by our elected officials, by our public health officials for the past 15 months. And it's got to count for something, particularly when that achievement is so miraculous, given the context of drug development, generally speaking, typically 5, 10, 15 years, that we were able to develop these vaccines in a very short period of time is miraculous, and that they're as effective and powerful as they are is incredible.
Yeah, it's quite an achievement, Congressman, on both sides of the border. And again, that sharing of the vaccines is so appreciated by Canadians. Beth, I just want to bring in you into this conversation about urgency. We've heard from some officials, we don't have to hurry, we don't have to take an urgent path for this. But in the tourism sector, it's not like you, as you said, you flick a switch. People need to plan and book, and I always reflect on the difference between, those businesses that have literally put their employee pay and maxed out their credit cards to stay alive versus, public servants who are moving for, and I'm not slagging public servants, but who are, in Ottawa, everybody's still being paid. And when your business is dying, it's just a totally different dynamic in terms of having to have action and elements of a plan roll out quickly with a sense of urgency. So do you get that sense from your members that they're starting to lose hope?
I do. And there are a few factors at play here that are creating a bit of a perfect storm for that fear and for that loss of hope. So, not only have we not, we don't have a plan to open the border, but you also look at the government's plan to start to kind of back off on some of the subsidy programs that have been put in place and have supported these businesses throughout the past 15 months. They're starting to ramp down with the expectation that, the economy is returning and that, we don't need those subsidies anymore, especially the wage subsidy. That's always been the big one. But if you take that away, but you don't open up the border so that we can't make, these businesses can't make their own revenue and generate their own income, then we're in jeopardy of losing about 75% of our industry. And can Canada really afford to lose its tourism industry? You remember that prior to the pandemic, we were bringing in $105 billion a year in annual receipts. We were contributing over 2% of the GDP. We were employing 1.8 million Canadians, and we were growing. So it's, we've been cut off at the knees right now. And so, yeah, there is a feeling of real desperation, but there's some hope there too, because we've been given a tool just recently through the expert advisory panel that shows us a way forward. This panel was the expert advisory panel on testing and screening. They gave us 5 solid recommendations on how we can begin to move people back and forth across the border, depending on whether they've been vaccinated fully or partially, or they've got an immunity because they've had the virus, or they're not vaccinated. And they gave us some simple but solid, based in science recommendations on how we can start moving travelers again. And you add that to the medical officers and the scientists that are telling us that if you've got your second dose, you are protected against that Delta variant. And so we as an industry are doing our part to also encourage Canadians to get it there and get their second dose. I got my second dose yesterday, and I'm happy to tell anybody within my circle that it's worthwhile doing, so that we can, with confidence and with the confidence of Canadians, talk about a plan and put a plan in place to get the border open. And that narrative does need to change. And Canada is on par as a vaccinated country. We are on par with other countries that are our customers. You look at the UK, you look at France, and you look at the US. Those are our top 3 markets for tourism into Canada, and we are on par with vaccine rates, and yet our travel plans and the clarity around how we can travel is not there yet. We are not on par with our competitors at that level, and we need to be. We need to be part of that competitive playing field, so that people can start to plan to come back to Canada, and we need the travel experience to be a seamless one. Whether if you're coming from England to Canada, and then when you get to Canada and you're traveling within Canada, we need this travel experience to be seamless. So one travel plan for Canada, and a plan to open the borders with timelines so that our businesses can begin to prepare to welcome their guests back.
That's awesome. And just one really quick couple of sentences, if you would. I know you're talking and have been talking to your colleagues in the States and for Travel US, the trade association there. The message they've been giving, if I can paraphrase, is let's get that border open. It's important to both sides of the businesses on both sides, as Congressman Higgins was alluding to.
It really is, and I was just talking to the head of Destination Canada yesterday, and they are already working with Brand USA on collaborative approaches to encouraging Americans and Canadians to cross the border. And I do want to just stress that it's not just about leisure travel. I want to make sure that everybody understands too. It's about business travel too. It's about allowing any business that does work internationally the freedom to get back to working internationally, and business travel and business events are a huge contributor to the tourism economy and the visitor economy here in Canada, as they are in other countries. The States, the business events segment of the industry is incredibly large and incredibly valuable as they rebuild their economy as well.
Just to throw in, just if I could, the complication this side of the border in Canada, it's Beth's word triggered it in my mind, going back and forth across the border. It's not just the U.S. border. That's part of our biggest problems here. We are operating now like 13 countries in one. Whatever happened to mobility rights and the Charter rights and freedoms, in my view, but we are operating like 13 countries in one, and we do somehow, for the tourism and hospitality industry, have to develop a national plan that we're operating under somewhat the same wavelengths. The rumors that are out there right now are unreal. Just in this little province, the province put an 18-lane inspection place this side of the bridge. The rumor is that you're going to be in that lineup forever when you come to PI. Well, no, they've created the 18 lanes to create the efficiency to move people fast, but the rumors get going. I'm not going to sit in line for 2 hours getting tested and waiting for my test. And so there's different levels of inspection and different rules in each province. And that too is one of our problems. And I think should be one of our lessons learned through this pandemic. We got to operate as one country.
And I think, one of the elements that we have to accept victory at some point with respect to the vaccination and what it's being able to deliver. And I think you look at the charts, the progress is being made, and I think we need to capitalize on that in an appropriate manner. You want to build on a couple of things that Beth was saying in terms of it's not just it's not just one industry that's calling for this. When you look at the essential businesses, the auto industry is a great example of one of the best integrated North American industries that there is, and they're having a tremendous difficulty getting really highly technical people back and forth across the border. And we just can't afford as a country not to have that easy flow of expertise to keep literally the drivers of the GDP going. Any thoughts on that, Mr. Easter?
Yeah, well, look, I got a local example here in my riding. The Canadian Metal Products, they're one of the biggest food processing equipment installers, manufacturer and installers of equipment in North America. They are installing equipment all across the United States, in California, in all over the U.S. And I've run into situations. Their CEO calls me quite often. One worker company, they go and they may be there 2-3 weeks, and so the border inspector, I guess, thinks they must have been on vacation. They're really an essential worker, not going over daily, but they're an essential worker to install, to assist the company in starting up the equipment. They follow all the rules when they're there. But one individual will get back across the border without a problem. The next individual we stopped have to go to the 3-day hotel. So it also depends on the border guard you get and the understanding there as well. So that is a problem in terms of essential workers in certain fields. In the auto industry, I know, food processing industry, and some others.
Great. Althea, I'll just bring you in here. If you had to give some, public policy, you're not in the business of giving advice in that realm, but what would you tell those that are trying to get this issue advanced? Is it think about the crossfire between the different politicians, or is it getting to the public and helping them understand it?
Well, I think, to go back to something that Congressman Higgins said at the beginning, I don't think the government is worried about fully vaccinated Americans who own property coming across the border. Canadians are probably more worried about the flock of international overseas travelers that would go to Wayne Easter's riding to visit Anne of Green Gables and whatever new variants that those individuals might be carrying with them. I think for Canadians and for decision makers, it's important to understand that, yes, the science doesn't make sense. We're not going to understand because the government is not making science-based decisions, but it's making political-based decisions. And it is hard for the government, as I said before, with regards to Premier Ford, when the provinces themselves, to Wayne Easter's point, I'm sitting here in Ottawa. Technically, the border with Quebec is closed between Ontario and Quebec. I'm technically not allowed to go on the Quebec side. And Quebecers, well, they can go have a drink on patios and life seems to be kind of normal on the other side of the river. Things are different here. It doesn't make sense. I don't think we need to understand it makes sense. But I think for the Canadian government, it cannot start accepting Brian Higgins' constituents to Nova Scotia while it's still telling Canadians, even if you're doubly vaccinated, we're telling you not to travel at all overseas. So there's so many of these steps are intertwined. The vaccine passport, we know the government is working on it, is not ready to roll out yet. And so I think we need to give the government basically a month of, well, this is their timeline, I would suggest, a month to get their ducks in a row. Anita Anand, the public works minister, told reporters, I believe it was yesterday, that by the end of July, there should be enough doses in Canada to vaccinate 80% of the population with their 2 doses. It will be hard if those are the numbers we're at to justify why Canadians cannot leave their homes, cannot travel to another province, cannot go to the US overseas and go to Old Orchard or whatever they do every summer. I think that, and it will be hard to tell Beth's members that, tourists can't come up to Canada because we're worried about Canadians' health and safety and overflowing our hospitals.
Well, I want to thank you all for being on the panel. We've hit our time mark. I'll just close with, my own view is that we've got to act, promptly and quickly on this. The science is there. This is an issue that has to move in terms of the border. I hope the discussions between the Prime Minister and the President go well, and that we get, steps in short order, because things need to change. Each of you brought a really different perspective and a valuable perspective here. So thank you all for being here. And this concludes our broadcast. Again, so appreciated the conversation and dialogue.